Hey Roosters, and welcome back to another episode of Making My Own Homemade Trading Card Game. Today's episode we have some more big updates coming to the card game, changing some rules around, and some simple art and player interface, I guess you would call it, the GUI of the card game, the card layout essentially. And also some questions for you guys. Obviously this game is for me. First and foremost, I want myself to be happy with it, but at the same time I do want you guys to somehow, I don't want to just say, well, if you guys don't like it, tough. I do want you guys to be able to interact with the game to some degree on some level. So I do have some questions for you guys at the end of the video, just about your opinions on some things and throughout the video. But the point is, let's get into some of the new updates. So last video, the last update I did, this is what the cards looked like. This is how the rules were. You won by dealing 4 damage cards to your opponent, and there was 5 from the card types. The game started with 5 card types as well, but what I did was I cut out one of the card types and I took another card type and split it into 2 different cards. That was the latest update. Well, now what I'm doing is I'm taking that 2 card types and I'm smashing them back into 1 card type. If you guys don't know, in the last video, we did a playtest battle video, and although I kind of skipped around and didn't really show the full footage, I did myself get a big insight on how I want the game to be moving forward, and just some things that I don't really feel are working in the game's favor, in my personal opinion. Obviously, everybody's gonna have a different opinion on it, and if you even have an opinion on it, I'm sorry if I kind of make some changes that maybe you liked from the old version, but I do think they're the best thing for the game. So I took the heat, overheat, and the frozen card types, and I smashed them to one. I realized that they weren't really doing much of anything separate, so they might as well be one card, and I think it actually ends up working better thematically, and it also ends up working better mechanically. So now there's only 4 card types, and as you can tell, I also cut out the stance cards. So the stance cards were a big part of the last game, but I felt they were too big of a part and they were overshadowing some of the other mechanics that I needed to focus on to hit that the 3 main gameplay mechanics that I laid out in the very first episode. And if those don't come shine through, I will feel like I failed this card game, even if that means I have to get rid of some card mechanics that I also like equally. Shout out to a guy who actually made a comment on this video, and he was talking about the stance mechanic. I'll see if I can get a picture of his name up on screen. But the point was that essentially what he asked me is, well, do you think that the mechanic is really that necessary? And I was like, yeah, I think it is. It's pretty fun. But shout out to him because lo and behold, it doesn't seem like it's really that necessary. And I think if anything has to go, it's one of the things that can go. We'll talk about this how stances might be implemented still into the game as we go on, but as they were, the stance cards are completely removed and replaced by a new card type, the Helix Gladiator, which are very similar to sprites, and we'll talk about that a little bit again. But just know that we're down to 4 card types, and an unregulated frame card or a regulation frame card or whatever you call it, a regulator card, a Helix Gladiator, sprites, and a action cards. So taking a look at how action cards are now, the old action card is on the left, the new on the right. There are a bunch of different changes I made, but ultimately they function nigh identical. The biggest change being this little second text box you may have noticed at the bottom of the card. So if we take a look at that second text box, it's an upside down text box, an effect box that has an effect in it. What does that mean? There's going to be This is a new mechanic I'm adding to the game because throughout the last playtest, what I came to realize is that the game sometimes you would draw a hand of cards and you just have nothing you could really use them for, and it kind of felt really bad. Once you set up your sprites, you only really were playing one action card a turn, and you were drawing a card a turn. So you were playing a card and drawing a card, but at the same time, the cards you already had in your hand were almost completely dead, and they just didn't feel like they were worth anything. Once in a while, you may play a card to replace a sprite that just got exhausted, or you may discard a card for an effect. But with this new secondary text box, every card has a secondary use from its primary use, and that means you can use it to do different things. Right now, there are 4 main different types of effects that are going to show up in these secondary text boxes: transmute effects, discard effects, lord effects, and flip effects. So we're going to get into each of those 4 different types right now. The transmute effects is very simple. If it says transmute, you can essentially attach it to a sprite, probably also a helix on your field, to give it some sort of just change in qualities, whether it be changing its attribute, which is going to be important a little bit later, or giving it just a simple stat buff of some kind, like giving it plus defense boosting effects. Discard effects are very simple. You might have guessed. You simply discard the card from your hand and you activate the discard effect. They might have a cost, they might have timing, and some of them don't have either of those two things. And essentially, whenever you want, you discard this and you activate this effect. I'm gonna try to put some costs and some timings in there to keep them railed in. But the point is that they're just an extra thing to do with cards in your hand once you get set up. Lord cards are the most unique, and they're part of the way I'm still implementing the stance card into the game. Essentially, the way it works is that when you during your turn, you can put a Lord card, a card essentially with one of these stance symbols from it, into your Lord zone, and when you do that, cards in your Lord zone will have use effects that you can use for one-time effects that you use them and you never get to use them as long as this card's still in play again. And then between both players, this is the biggest thing. Only one Lord card of any one type can exist. So there's 6 different types, and both players can only have um, one Lord card of between both players. So all players of the table, only one Lord card of each type can exist. And then what this does for the game is that it adds an extra layer of tension because I'm introducing into the game a concept called critical effects or critical damage, which means if you deal a certain amount of damage, you get a secondary effect. In the last Patience Battle video, I said if you have power over your opponent's defense by 5, you get to deal 2 damage to your opponent. Well, another critical effect is that you are able to steal or discard one of your opponent's Lord cards, removing their Lord card from the game, so opening it up for you to play your own Lord card of that type. And obviously, your opponent will have to then try to deal another critical effect if they want to get that back into play. And then one thing I forgot to write down here is that if you conquer all 6 types, then you get the ability to win the game. So it's an alternate win condition for the game here. That if you happen to be able to get your hands on all 6 different Lord types, then you're able to simply win the game. And so it's giving a secondary win condition that I may remove later if it becomes too much of a big deal, but I think it's really important because as the game stands right now, the singular win condition of dealing 5 damage is a little bit interesting as the game grinds to a halt. As it comes down to those last wires, I just felt the game was getting a little slow and lacking tension. Sometimes it's very obvious to see who's already going to win the game. But if you know that even if I have less 4 damage on me and less cards left in deck, if I can pull out a Lord victory or a Conquer victory, then maybe I can still get the W. It still adds that level of tension. So if like I have 5 or 4 even of the different Lord types in play, maybe my opponent has 1 or 2, then I don't really need to beat him. I just need to get a critical effect or some other effect to steal one of his lords, and then I can hopefully win the game that way. And I'll be able to pull the rug from under my opponent, and it keeps tension at the end of the game there. The fourth type of secondary effect is flips. And so flips will activate whenever a card is flipped up, obviously from stamina. So if it's discarded from stamina, from your shields, which is a new mechanic that we're going to get into, or if it's just when you're taking a damage card for the purposes of losing the game, then the flip effect might activate. For example, this one right here says resist 2. So if you flip this up when you're shields, then it counts essentially as 2 shields being flipped instead of the singular 1 that normally a shield card would count as, and we'll talk about shields a little bit later. And of course, there's always vanilla. It means that it just doesn't have an effect. I'm going to try to keep the vanillas to a minimum. I don't want it to be that a bunch of cards have this being the case, being the fact that this secondary text box's purpose is to give cards without purpose, but I do want to put it in there for balance mechanics, so some cards will be really powerful, but they don't have a secondary effect, so you're going to really have to build around them, such as your big boss sprites and stuff like that. Beyond other changes, the new mechanic that I added in is plasma and physical types of actions. So essentially all it is it just changes. If I'm playing a plasma attack, you have to block with a plasma card. You can't block with a physical card, and vice versa. It doesn't really change that much right now, but it is sort of big for the gameplay because it really just makes blocking and defending a little more interesting. Because a lot of times before, because you can block and defend with any card from your hand, sometimes it felt really hard to push damage unless your opponent just didn't have any cards, and then it was like super easy. But now, the threat and the tension is a little bit there as you throw out an attack. Maybe your opponent can block it, maybe not. So sometimes you don't want to throw all your resources into it or stuff like that. It just gives more options and more strategy to playing attacks and defenses, and deck building as well, of course. This is a small one. I changed some things when it comes to the classification of cards. So before, if you looked in the right under the name, there was melee and blade, for example. Those were simply classifications for other card effects or reference, but they didn't do anything for the game. And if you look at the bottom left card of the old action cards, there was the, of course, uh, type of card, the material type it was known as. But now I moved the material type and the attack type over to the like sideways onto the side of on the right hand side of the card, and I think that really frees up space on the bottom of the card, especially to add those second text boxes, but also so that I think it just looks prettier there. It's just personal opinion, yeah. And then this gets that actually moves me on to my next point. So on the side of the card here, you see that they're in red. It said strike. And so that leads me on to my next point, which is the colors of the game. So there's always been 6 colors and a 7th neutral color: yellow, green, orange, blue, red, purple. Very generic stuff. And before, they each had names um, that sort of made sense to them. So before, it was air, floral, wood. Well, it didn't make sense, rather. It was air, floral, wood, hydro, stone, metal, and null. And essentially, the idea was that these were 6 different materials that you find in the wild. So if you're just living in the wild, the air will be breathing. You can use that to turbine, wind power, and stuff like that. The wind is important for sailing. Hydro meant water, ice. Floral was nature in the sense of grass, fruits. Wood would have been trees, obviously. Stone and metal are obviously stone and metal. The point was these were just natural resources you'll find in the wild, and it made sense for a while. But as I kept playing and playtesting the game, I felt the elemental idea of it was too commanding of design space. And so every time I would design an air card, it would be like wind attack, twister, tornado, and it kind of just, for some reason, my brain would shift into that sort of mind space in which that they were the elemental types, which was the complete point of not naming them fire, water, earth, wind, lightning, right? I wanted to not think of them as elements, but rather materials or resources. So what I did was I ended up switching it from elements entirely to concepts of combat. This is a combat game. So now the colors: yellow is endure, green is rest, orange is push, blue is command, red is strike, purple is focus, and gray is universal and or learn slash train. These names are obviously going to switch around a bunch, but I kind of like learn or train more than universal because all the other names kind of were one word, like sort of concepts, and so learn and train fits into that, in my opinion. Another thing I did, simply from changing the names of the 6 types, was changing the card back. So before, if you didn't know, the color of the card did not affect the card back in question. So as you see here, a floral, a wood, a stone card could all look the same from a glance. And I really didn't like that. But there is a secondary purpose to this. So when you do a card back based off card type, which is what I did, so actions were green, sprites were red, you essentially put into place this idea that you can draw your hand and you know exactly how many of each card type you have in your hand. Um, Other card games do it by color. So if you draw a hand, you know how many cards of each color you have in your hand. And depending on how important colors or card types are in your game, either or could be really important. In my game, I figured that action and sprites were so different and served such different purposes that the idea that you would draw your hand, you know exactly how many actions, how many sprites you would have, was super important. But as I'm trying to put more emphasis on the 6 colors, I'm thinking maybe adding the color card backgrounds would not exemplify, would add to that push. So eventually, instantly, when you draw your hand of however many cards, say if you draw a hand of 7 cards and you had one card of each type, you instantly know that you have one card of each type. Whereas before, you really wouldn't be able to tell unless you really looked for that piece of information on the card. And yeah, so essentially my question for you guys in this current piece of time is, which one do you prefer? Do you prefer the different colored backgrounds for the different 6 colors, or do you prefer that the different card types have a different background color or background design to denote them that much easier? Another thing I'm doing here is I'm trimming some of the old mechanics. As I said earlier, I've completely removed your stance cards. That's not the only thing I'm removing. So stance cards are going to become, your stance deck is going to be replaced by your Helix Gladiator deck, right? Um, and your support zone is going to be replaced by your Lord zone. And now this might seem like, okay, you're changing things, but you don't seem to be really removing anything. But both of these two things are changing a lot about how the game functions right now uh in terms of just simply the amount of information it takes to function in this game. So before you had to worry about your supports, which were always giving effects. Lore cards now give one-time effects, so they're not so constant, and you don't have to focus on them so much. You don't really need to worry about what lore effects your opponent has access to. More importantly, you only need to focus on what lore effects your opponent has, what lore types your opponent has access to, which which is a big difference in terms of just the amount of load it takes on your brain. The other thing is that with the introduction of this new type, unregulated frames, and right, so this adds a second layer of gameplay mechanic to the game. I'm sorry, I'm trying to edit and talk at the same time. Your front sprite is completely being replaced by your Helix Gladiator. And so now you don't have a front sprite anymore. You just have a Helix Gladiator and an attack sprite and a defense sprite, essentially. And what this also does for the game is that when I was playing my playtest video, the other video, a lot of times, so often, so often, what would happen is I would open the game and you wouldn't have a good sprite opener. And if you don't have a good sprite opener, you're kind of just cooked. I introduced a rule that you can just search out any sprite you want that's like 1 cost or lower, and or 1 cost because there's nothing lower than 1, and just instantly put it onto the field. But it was really weak even then, that it kind of felt like, well, if you're going to search out any sprite you want, you might as well have a secondary, like, you might as well just make it that that's how the game works. There's no point putting the card in your deck if you're going to search it out. So that's what I did. And now the front sprite is completely replaced by your Helix Gladiator, and we'll talk about the Helix Gladiators in depth a little bit later, but that's what you need to know for right now. The Lord Zone will be over here. The unregulated card would be down there, and then your coolant cards and your coolant cards and your heat cards would be like on either side of them, and so you can easily track. Now this may still look busy, but remember, if you had actual cards with you, it would look completely different from this right now. Okay, another thing I'm doing is, this is just purely like for funsies, right? This idea of having stamina as a second pile is completely removed right now. So what we're doing instead is the stamina, when it refers to stamina, it refers to whatever stamina is on your main Helix Gladiator, which means you technically don't need this anymore, except I'm repurposing it into shields. Shields now, they do what your stamina cards used to do, which is, well, no, they don't. They do half of what your stamina cards used to do. Before, you could discard stamina to reduce damage. Now shields just do the same thing. The difference is they're just two separate card types. So if something says gain a stamina or gain a shield, I can pull that lever a little bit differently in design space, so that a card that uses stamina can't use a shield, and a card that uses shields can't use stamina, but at the same time I can design cards appropriately for that difference um, in card mechanics, essentially. And that means that support cards are completely gone now. I introduced support cards like the video before last, and I tested them last video, and I instantly didn't like them. They bog down the game far too much. Just adds more stuff you have to pay attention to. Your sprites already take up the purpose of having cards on the field that give you continuous effects. And now with your Helix Gladiator, even more so. You don't need the support zone at all. It's completely gone. We don't like it. We don't need it. Moving on. I kept talking about this Helix Gladiator thing. What is the Helix Gladiator? It is essentially your leader card, your frame. The thematic idea is that you'll have a frame, a basic Helix Gladiator, and you'll add sprites to each side, and these sprites become a DNA. Their DNA infects the robot and transforms it into a mutated robot, and that's what your Helix Gladiator's other forms are. So essentially, this solves the purpose of the early game sprite problem. Every person will start with a Helix Gladiator that doesn't have a bond cost, it's called, a bonding effect. So the green there is your bond. So every sprite will have a green attribute between different animal types. So this yellow one is a flying one. I don't know how easy it is to tell. The gray one is a rogue, I'm calling it, or look, a small mammal. But then, like, for example, the Skelerex is a dinosaur, a lizard. And so there'd be lizards, bugs, big mammals, small mammals, flying, and aquatic. So sea creatures and creatures with wings, essentially. And so you'll start the game with one that doesn't have a bond cost. But as you play sprites on either side, attack and defense, you can play a Helix Gladiator from your Helix Gladiator deck that has a bond cost, and you can bond it, it's called, and you can put it into play. It's a whole lot more powerful than the Helix Gladiators without them. So if you look at the stats on the side there, he has 1 1 1 1 2 2 2 2, and he has 1 1 2 2 3 6. So he's a whole ton more powerful than that guy. If you have six stamina on your main Helix Gladiator, he's a 6 power card, which means if you play a melee attack, he'll be swinging in for 6. It's just massive. It's huge. But for example, even if you use 6 stamina on this guy, he's still only a 2. You're not supposed to stay in this form. You're supposed to upgrade and go into different Helix Gladiators. And the green text box here will add secondary hurdles you have to get through to turn into this Helix Gladiator. So the more powerful Helix Gladiator, the more you need to activate it beyond its 2 main sprite types. So for example, this guy, King Tux, let's take him as for example. He needs a Apex Helix, which is one of the symbols he has there, and a Lizard Helix, which is this other symbol he has there. So a big mammal, essentially, and a lizard of some type. So that would be simple enough to do. You just need to have those 2 types, but he has a secondary bonding cost. So in the green text box, it says 1 stamina, 3 sprite, and 1 push sprite. So 1 orange sprite and 1 sprite with 3 stamina on it. So, for example, in this example here, he wouldn't be able to bring out King Tusk because you have 2 stamina, 1 sprite, and neither of them, first off, neither of them fit your 2 sprite typings that you need to transform into, but also neither of them fit your bonding requirements that he needs as well. But if you were to have Skelerex out, he would fit your lizard type. He would also be a stamina 3 sprite, and he would be a push sprite. So the only thing you would need now is a Apex sprite to put on the other side, and then you would be able to bring out King Tusk. Now, another thing about Helix Gladiators is important to note that if you lose, like say Skelerex dies, he runs out of stamina, he goes to your exhaust pile. You don't have to detransform. You get to stay King Tusk, but if you were then to choose to transform into something else, you wouldn't be able to go back until you meet those requirements once again. And that's Helix Gladiators. They essentially are the same as your front sprites. The only difference being that they start in a different deck and you can sort of switch between them to get different utility, different abilities, and stuff like that throughout the game. Depending on what sprites you currently have in your hand and in play. This is where the transmute from earlier comes in, because, for example, if you had a Brunny that didn't meet one of your requirements, you could transmute it into a flying sprite, and then it would meet one of your requirements, and you'd be able to transform into the Helix Gladiator of your choice. The biggest difference right now between sprites and Helix Gladiator is Helix Gladiators come with base power, and sprites only come with universal boost power. So the numbers on your sprite cards will be your universal boost, meaning that if it's an attack booster, that's what your attack boost number becomes. And because they don't go into the front position anymore, there was no point of having that stat on the card. And now that your sprites, your Helix Gladiator can't go into your booster positions, there's no point in having a booster number on the card. So now Helix Gladiators have your power, and your sprites have your boosts. Moving on to the balancing mechanic, the heat and the coolant. What is that changing up into? Before, there were two separate cards. I literally just smashed them into one card, quite point blank, period. They still have the same offset, the same stat changes when they're active. The only difference now is that the card can turn sideways to start the game, as you can see here, and has an effect here, and that's really big, because you have your effect while you're sideways, and while it's sideways, it means that neither offset has been reached yet. When the offset of one or the other is reached, you would flip it up to that side where the stat changes become relevant and easy to read for you, the player. And if you want, you could probably like put a card on top of the other side just in case so nobody gets confused, so your opponent doesn't get confused which side you're using or whatever. But the point is, the side that is face up for you is the side that's activated. So if you have two more heat than you have coolant, you activate the heat side, you lose your access to that effect, and you get these stat changes. So the point is, keep your thing balanced because you get access to a cool effect. Don't keep your thing balanced, you get access to a negative / positive stat change, as well as the old mechanic of still being in play. So the way it's going to work now is that if for every heat card you have, you draw a card from your shield pile. And for every coolant card you have, you put a card from your into your shield pile. And then also when you're boosting coolant, then you'll take cards from your shield pile into your hand when you're boosting coolant, but when you're boosting heat, you'll take cards from your hand and put them into your shield pile. So essentially, the more coolant you have, the easier it is to boost coolant, but the more, or rather, no, sorry, my bad. To boost heat, you put a card from your hand into your heat pile, not into your shield pile. To boost coolant, take a card from your shield pile and put it into your coolant pile. So essentially, the more coolant you have, the easier it is to boost coolant. The more heat you have, the easier it is to boost heat. So it is a little bit enticing to just go all in on one, but to balance it is to get access to these effects. And again, I'm going to, of course, do another playtest in a future video and to show you guys more what I mean by this. But keep that in mind as we move forward. Sadly, stance cards are completely dead and gone. We don't talk about them anymore. It's very sad. I really liked how they looked, but they did not fit the way the game was working as of now. So, unfortunately, they're gone. Advantage still exists, though. So cards will still gain advantage through various effects rather than through on your stances. So, again, advantage means that the cost of a card is paid by discarding stamina instead of exhausting it. At disadvantage, if you somehow were to gain it, which doesn't exist right now, you get -1 power, and then if for some reason I would bring back neutral, it would still work the same way it did before. But right now, advantage still exists, meaning that if a card says it has advantage, it means you discard the stamina, pay for its cost instead of exhausting it. Combat essentially works the exact same, the difference being now that you can discard cards from your shield deck to reduce the power of your opponent's incoming attacks. So every turn you'll be able to allocate 2 cards from the top of your deck to either your stamina, so either attached to your Helix, to your Gladiator, or to your shield cards. That means put them in your shield pile. And in doing that, essentially, you you can build up shield over time, and every time your opponent's coming with a big 5 swing that you can't block, you can discard X amount of shield cards. Discard, not exhaust. That's big, really important. And you can add reduce the power of that attack by that much. So this means that attacks that may be dealing critical damage, aka 5 or more damage, or have 5 or more power and deal critical damage, well, you can reduce it so it doesn't do that. Or if you're blocking for 3 and your opponent's attacking for 4 or 5, you can reduce it so you don't take any damage at all by discarding 2 shield cards. Other than that, the physical and plasma change. Again, you attack with plasma, your opponent has to block with plasma. You attack with physical, your opponent has to block with physical. The only big difference between them beyond that simple fact right now is the fact that physical cards will use the stats of your sprites in play and buff them, and plasma cards will ignore that entirely and give you raw stats. The benefit of playing plasma cards means that if you have a weaker stamina, like a frame stamina that didn't bond into something stronger yet, you can still deal decent damage to your opponent, but obviously physical attacks as the game goes on will become a whole lot more powerful as your opponent's sprite becomes more powerful, and so you still want to try to keep up with them in that sense. Yeah, and beyond that, everything about the game is virtually the same. Um, Still, sprites can only spend stamina from themselves to pay for cards of the same color as them. So if you have a green orange sprite or a yellow sprite or even a gray sprite can't pay for anything but gray. But gray actions can be used to can any card can pay for gray, but gray can only pay for gray essentially. That's how that works. So the gray sprite may be a little more universal in the sense that anything can pay for it, but it also has a downside in that it can only pay for other gray cards. And also, although they give you good universal effects, you don't want to jam pack your deck full of them, because they're not that great. They're still You still want to try to use the colors essentially. I don't want gray to just become the best color. Okay, beyond that, I think that's it for the updates. One last question, a couple more questions before we end out here. What do you guys think about the art direction for the game? I know a lot of people don't really care about art, especially in homemade trading card games, because obviously I'm making this myself. I'm doing all the art myself, so you don't expect too much from me. I'm not an artist by any means. So this is some of the art I did. The two on the left are the newer pieces of art that I did for the game. These are two Helix Gladiators. And I'm just wondering what you guys feel. I kind of like the more robotic design of this older Helix Gladiator that I did and I recolored here. Um, but the newer ones, a lot of people may resonate with more people due to its more comic bookish style with more humanish proportions. I don't really like that as much, but I know some people might, and I'm interested in knowing what you guys feel about it, including some other pieces of art that I've done throughout the game. I've only ever done these essentially 5 pieces of art for the game ever. And so trying to get a more finite idea of what you guys expect or want from the art. I know I kind of like the more robotic designs. What are you guys more interested in? It's a big question for me because knowing that is going to help me move forward as I start to get into the phase of mass producing art, getting a lot of art done because I have over 100 pieces of art to do for this game. With only 5 done so far, you can see I have a long way to go, and I don't want to take forever to get the art done. By the time the game is done being designed, I want to be able to have art on the playtest cards for playtesting. I don't want to keep using these imageless cards, so I'm trying to get an idea of the art direction for the game. And that being said, this is how the game has evolved over the years. Again, the colors on the newest cards may not stick. I may go back to keeping the card back colors being based off of the card type, but you can see how the card just layout has changed throughout the updates I keep making to the game. And that's the point of this series, so you can see the evolution of the game. At the start, a lot of the aspects were really big on the card. The text box was really huge. Now the text box is smaller. The art is smaller. A lot of this, just different aspects of the cards are smaller. I don't want to make everything too small because obviously then it just becomes hard to read, especially from across the table. But I do want it to be that it doesn't overpower the art. It doesn't take up all the card and it's just huge, big there in your face. That's me for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys come back for more. I have more updates, more different changes, obviously, I want to make. And I hope you guys stick around for it because I'm really excited for the way this game is shaping up and the way it's going. I'm taking aspects from all my favorite card games. I'm introducing my own favorite mechanics that I like personally to see in card games. And it's shaping up to be my most anticipated card game in a time in which card games are coming out by the dozen. I hope to see you guys in the next video where we're probably going to make some more iterations on the card backs, and who knows, we're probably going to maybe do some more art and do some more playtesting. We'll see. But I hope to see you guys there either way. Well, that's going to be all for now, but if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you guys go ahead and watch some of our other videos that we've made on this channel. Also, give this video a like if you thoroughly enjoyed it. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our future content. And I hope to see you guys back at the Roost.